That morning began with a sight that nearly made Daniel Brooks's heart stop a strange woman standing in his kitchen. Her hair slightly tousled her bare feet, gliding across the cold tile, and the only thing on her body was his white shirt. The moment hit him like a slap from fate, snapping him awake from a fatigue-soaked sleep that hadn't fully released him. Daniel jolted upright from the old sofa where he had fallen asleep, without remembering when his sleep-deprived eyes, widening as the first beam of morning light cut through the window and washed over that unfamiliar silhouette. The scent of coffee, rising from the old machine, mixed with the lingering smell of last night's rain, creating an atmosphere that felt almost impossible to name, warm yet threatening familiar, yet eerily strange. The woman turned her brown hair falling loosely over her shoulders, her grey eyes deep like winter water, locking on to Daniel's bewildered stare. And then she smiled. "You really don't remember anything from last night, do you?" Daniel stammered, his chest tightening, because no, he didn't remember. He only remembered the violent storm, the dark road, the crunch of metal as the luxury car slammed into a utility pole, and the way he forgot to breathe as he dragged the unconscious woman out of the smoke. But this moment, this image standing before him, he did not recall at all. His small kitchen suddenly felt like a stage where every movement slowed, as if time itself was holding its breath, waiting for his answer. Emily Hart set the cup down so gently it barely made a sound, but the silence only amplified the pounding in Daniel's chest. She tilted her head, eyes sharp, studying him as if she could read every fragmented thought still trapped in his shaken mind. Then, in a calm voice, laced with something deeper, she said, "I am the one you pulled from the burning car last night, and I am also the person who owns the house you and your daughter are living in." The words hit like thunder, louder than the storm that had ravaged the night before. Daniel froze. His hands went cold. His spine stiffened as if someone had poured concrete down his back. Emily stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his face. There was something in her eyes, gratitude mixed with secrecy, and a hint of someone weighing his fate in a way he could not yet understand. From the narrow hallway came a soft laugh, the small, bright giggle of 8-year-old Lila. The bedroom door cracked open, and her curly hair and wide round eyes peeked out. "Daddy, who is that?" Daniel swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay steady. "Just someone who needed help last night." Emily looked at Lila with a sudden warmth, as though the child's presence touched a part of her heart she had kept locked away for years. But the softness vanished quickly, replaced by the composed, distant control she wore like armor. The air inside the small kitchen thickened almost tangible. Daniel felt the weight of something invisible pressing against him, as if he stood on the brink of a turning point his life had never prepared him for. Part of him wanted to ask questions to understand, to gather every piece of memory blurred by rain and shock. Another part wanted to flee the room, escape the sharp, enigmatic gaze of the woman wearing his shirt. Emily's fingers brushed the edge of the table, and for the briefest moment they trembled just enough for Daniel to notice she was not as calm as she appeared. Perhaps both of them were standing at the beginning of something neither had expected. "Daniel," Emily said, her voice dropping serious enough to still the very air in the room, "we need to talk. There are things you do not know about last night and about me." Outside the sun was rising, but inside this small room the light seemed to retreat, giving way to an uneasy tension that felt like the opening step of a journey with no return. Daniel stood there, heart pounding, sensing with absolute clarity that his life and Lila's was about to shift in a direction he had never imagined. and more frightening than anything was the truth quietly blooming inside him. He wanted to know what waited ahead. That conversation, born from a storm and a white shirt, would become the moment that changed everything forever. The small kitchen fell into silence as Daniel looked at the woman standing before him. Emily Hart, the woman he had pulled back from the edge of life and death the previous night, now wearing his shirt and watching him with a blend of gratitude, secrecy, and a cold, controlled awareness he had no idea how to face. The lingering drops of rain tapping softly outside the porch seemed to echo the chaotic memories of the night before dragging him back to the moment everything began. Emily folded her arms and leaned slightly toward him, her voice calm, yet sharp as a blade, as she said, "Last night you did not just save me, you saved an entire company." Daniel jolted, a pulse striking hard at his temple. He wanted to ask why, but his throat tightened to the point no sound could escape. All he remembered were flickering lights, sparks flying from the engine, and the woman in front of him, trembling in his arms like a small bird, clinging to its last breaths. Emily continued, her eyes lowering to the floor as if choosing each word carefully. That car did not just crash, its braking system was tampered with. Daniel's breathing quickened, a cold shiver sliding along his spine. Questions exploded in his mind, none of them reaching his lips. She lifted her gaze, and the calm authority of a CEO slipped away, replaced by the look of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, fighting desperately not to fall. "Someone wants me dead." The room seemed to shrink. Lila's soft laughter floated from the bedroom, a gentle sound, completely at odds with the weight of what had just been said. Daniel placed a hand on the table to steady himself. "Why you?" he asked, his voice low with fear and confusion. "Because I refused a business deal worth $300 million. The answer made him freeze, because to him, that number belonged to a world beyond imagination. Emily went on, her voice roughening, as if the truth itself was draining her strength. "I have evidence, and last night I think they decided to resolve everything in the simplest way." Daniel swallowed hard as the image of the wrecked car flashed through his mind, the flames bursting just moments after he had pulled Emily free. 1 second slower, and neither of them would be standing in this kitchen. Emily circled around the table as if trying to shake off the remnants of fear. "I planned to handle it alone to keep everyone else out. But last night you became part of this, whether you chose to or not." Daniel frowned, anger and fear rising like a tide. "I never asked for that. I only did what anyone should do." Emily nodded gently, yet her eyes softened, as though she saw something inside him he did not realize existed. "I know. And that is exactly what makes you the person they never expected." Daniel did not understand, or perhaps he did not want to. He was just a single father, trying to survive every bill and every day. There was no world where he belonged in schemes, corporate warfare, money, and power. But Emily looked at him as if he were the missing piece of a puzzle she had been chasing for years. "When I woke up in your room last night," she said softly, "I saw something most people in my company do not have: unconditional kindness. Something they fear." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "You are saying that because I am decent, I am dangerous?" "No," Emily replied, shaking her head. "Because you prove kindness still exists, and people who rely on cruelty to survive always hate that." Her words silenced him. Inside him, something cracked, a quiet anger formed from poverty, from years of bowing his head, from every moment he had been dismissed. He understood what it felt like to be treated as if he were worthless. But hearing Emily speak, He realized she, too, was trapped in a world of danger he had never wanted to enter. Emily set her cup on the table slowly. "I am not here to ask you to keep helping me. I am here to tell you that the house you live in, the only place where you can keep your daughter safe, is no longer outside this story." This time the anger surged sharply. "What are you talking about because I own it?" she said, her voice soft but heavy. "I bought the entire neighborhood 4 months ago, long before I knew you existed. And now if they discover I am alive, and who brought me home," Daniel stepped back, as if struck his heart dropping into his stomach. "You have put me in danger." Emily moved forward, and for the first time the coldness in her expression cracked, replaced by genuine worry. "I never wanted that. I will do everything I can to protect you and Lila. But you must understand, from the moment you pulled me out of that car, your life changed." Daniel turned away, his jaw tightening. He glanced toward Lila's room, where she was playing with the chipped crayons he had worked so hard to afford. He did not need chaos. He did not need drama. He did not want her world of power. He only wanted his daughter safe. Emily followed his gaze, and her voice softened. "Daniel, I know you do not trust me. I do not expect you to trust me now. But remember this. I owe you my life, and I will never let anyone pay the price for saving me." Silence stretched between them, heavy and crushing. Daniel felt an invisible pressure settling on his chest, squeezing the breath from him. Finally he whispered, "Then what do you want from me?" Emily did not answer immediately. She walked toward the window, the morning light catching her tired but determined face. "I want you to hear the rest of the story, because what you know is only half of the truth." Daniel froze. If this was only half, what could the other half be? Emily turned back, her eyes sharp as a blade, yet her voice carried a terrifying loneliness. "Daniel, last night was not an accident. It was a warning." His heart sank. The small house suddenly felt too small for both of them, and for the secrets swelling like a rising storm. And in that moment, he understood. He had not just saved a stranger. He had touched a secret, capable of blowing his entire life apart. And the most frightening part was that his heart still wanted to know the truth. The only question left was whether he was ready to hear it. Emily stood by the window, the morning light sweeping across her face, sketching out features that were both sharp and exhausted, as if she had been fighting her whole life just to survive one more day. Daniel watched her, his hands curling into fists without knowing whether it was out of anger or fear. He had stepped in too far too fast, and for the first time he wondered if bringing her home last night had been a mistake. Emily drew a long breath, then spoke slowly and clearly, as though she meant to hammer each word into his mind. "Daniel, I was not just attacked. I was betrayed. By someone inside my own company." Daniel felt his heartbeat stall. That single truth made everything infinitely more dangerous. He was not an employee, not a bodyguard, not someone paid to protect anyone. He was just a single father who wanted a quiet life. Yet within the span of 12 hours, his entire world had been stretched to a breaking point. Emily continued, her gaze lifting toward the thin grey sky left over from the storm. "I discovered money being pulled from our research fund, nearly $10 million. And when I traced it back to its source, I realized the person behind it no longer wanted me alive." Daniel frowned. "Did you call the police?" "I cannot." Emily turned to him, her eyes burning with a mix of fury and despair. If the police get involved, the company's stock will crash straight down. Thousands of employees will be affected. And the people who want me dead will pretend to be concerned, shove all the blame onto their subordinates, and stay perfectly safe. I cannot let that happen. Daniel leaned back against the counter, his head heating up. He knew exactly what it felt like to be crushed by the powerful, but this situation was far beyond anything he ever wanted to understand. Emily saw the hesitation in his eyes, and her voice softened. Last night, when I was lying unconscious in your bed, I thought I was going to die. And the only thing I regretted was not the company or the money. It was how many days I had let pass without doing the right thing. Daniel looked at her, noticing for the first time the tremor in her voice. She was not just afraid. She was hurting deeply. The right thing, he repeated. What is that? Emily swallowed, as though the pain had been stuck in her throat for far too long. Stopping. Not running anymore, not hiding anymore, and refusing to let bad people win just because they have money and power. Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. You talk like I can actually help with any of this. Emily stepped closer, close enough that he could hear the faint quickness of her breath. You can do one thing. Daniel narrowed his eyes. What thing, trust me? The words were simple, but they crashed over him like a wave, freezing him in place. Trust her. Trust that he was now facing an assassination plot. Trust that last night was not an accident. Trust that someone like him, a man the world constantly overlooked, had any role to play in this enormous storm. Emily sensed the turmoil inside him and stepped back, giving him space to breathe. You think I want to drag you into this? She asked, her voice soft but deep. I wish last night had never happened. I wish I could forget the moment the car spun and I thought it was over. But then you appeared. You were not a part of any plan. You were just a decent man at the right moment. And that Daniel is exactly what the people behind this never accounted for. Daniel felt a warmth rise in his chest like a warning, because he realized he was beginning to care about her more than he should. Light footsteps echoed from the hallway, and Lila peeked out with her sleepy, round face. Daddy, I am hungry. Emily looked at the little girl, and every trace of her sharpness melted. Daniel walked over to Lila and gently stroked her hair, his voice naturally softening. All right, sweetheart, Daddy will make breakfast now. Emily watched the two of them, as if witnessing something she had lost long ago. Daniel, she said, when Lila returned to her room. You can hate me, doubt me, even want me out of your life. But understand this. I will not allow anyone to touch that child, not for a single second. Daniel froze. Her words struck straight at the instinct of a father. You think this could affect Lila? Emily inhaled deeply. If they find out you brought me home, they could track it back to you. And for people like them, threatening someone's family is far too easy. Daniel's fists tightened until veins rose along his neck. He could handle danger. But his daughter, no one, absolutely no one, was allowed to touch Lila. Emily saw the shift in his eyes and continued firmly. I can protect both of you. I have resources, lawyers, security people I trust. But for me to do that, I need you to cooperate. Daniel inhaled sharply, his mind spinning with 100 frantic thoughts. All his life, he had avoided trouble, avoided powerful people, avoided anything that could destabilize the small, fragile peace he had built for his daughter. Yet trouble now stood right in front of him, in the form of Emily Hart, looking at him with eyes both strong and broken. How exactly do you want me to cooperate? He asked, his voice rough. Emily gripped the edge of the table, her eyes lighting with renewed determination. I want you to tell me every detail from last night, everything you saw before I lost consciousness. I need to know what happened after the brakes failed. You are the only witness. Daniel stared at her for so long, the air seemed to freeze. He remembered the final burst of flames, the way her body shook in his arms, the smell of gasoline and burning metal. Those memories were not easy to pull open, but for Lila, he would. All right, he said slowly. I will tell you. Emily exhaled in relief, a breath she might not have realized she had been holding. But Daniel added his voice sharper and colder, drawn from the deepest instinct inside him, as a father. But hear me clearly, Emily. If any part of this puts my daughter in danger, I do not care if you are a CEO or the queen of the entire world. I will protect my child at any cost. Emily did not flinch. She nodded, slow, firm. I would expect nothing less. Outside, the first rays of sunlight pierced through the thick clouds and lit the white shirt she was wearing, the same shirt that had become an unintended symbol of the strange bond between them, a storm, an act of kindness, and a secret large enough to alter both of their lives. And as Daniel began recounting every detail of that night, he had no idea his words were about to unlock a truth far more brutal, a truth that would not only change Emily, but might change him as well. Daniel began to speak, and from the very first sentences, the air in the small kitchen felt drained, leaving behind the heavy weight of memories that had not yet cooled. Emily leaned against the counter, her fingers unconsciously gripping the hem of Daniel's shirt she was wearing as if she needed to hold on to it to stay steady. As for Daniel, his eyes sank deep into the darkness of his recollection, each detail flowing out slowly like an underground stream, just unearthed, filled with sound smell and raw fear, still alive beneath the surface. He described the moment he saw the luxury car lose control on the mountain road, the headlights flickering like a desperate SOS. He remembered the tires skidding on the wet pavement, the tension flooding his body as he slammed his brakes, and even the sound of his own breathing as he ran toward the wreck. Emily was pulled into every word, as if she were watching the footage of the very moment she had been unconscious within. When I got close, Daniel said I saw a shadow inside. You slumped over the steering wheel. And then something made my whole spine go cold. Emily's head snapped up so fast the cup on the table trembled. What was it? Daniel met her eyes. The driver's side door had been pried open. A thick silence dropped over the room. Emily did not move, but the color drained from her face, little by little, as if Daniel's words had sliced straight into a truth she had tried hard to bury. Are you sure? Daniel nodded. I used to fix cars, replace locks, pry open jammed doors. I know those marks. Someone tampered with the car before you ever got in. Emily squeezed her eyes shut. A faint tremor flickered across her lashes, quick but impossible for Daniel to miss. Keep going, she whispered. Daniel dove back into the memory pulled by the storm of the previous night, all over again. The engine was still running, but the gear was pushed into drive even though the handbrake was on. I do not know how, but I could feel that the car was being forced to move. Emily opened her eyes, horror and fury swirling together. My God, Daniel continued, unable to stop himself. Then the crash happened. The car spun once, then slammed into the power pole. I did not think anyone would survive. His voice cracked his hands, trembling slightly, as the memory still cut like a blade. But I heard you. Faint. When I smashed, the window flames were already rising from the front engine. You did not open your eyes. I had to kick the door loose and drag you out." And he stopped, his throat closing. Emily waited. And I thought if I had been 1 second slower, you would not be standing here. Emily could not speak, could not take a steady breath, could not hide the sharp ache of gratitude spreading through her chest, mingled with a fresh terror, finally given a name. She turned away, hiding the shake in her expression that she refused to let anyone see, least of all the man who had walked straight into her storm. But Daniel was not finished, because something else had been haunting him even more than the fire. "When I carried you," he said, his voice dropping as if afraid someone outside could hear, "I saw a small camera attached under the car." Emily jerked upright as if struck by electricity. "A camera?" "Yes." "About the size of a thumb, not the usual kind. Looked like something used to record or track." Emily's face drained of color entirely. She whispered, "They wanted to film my death." Daniel said nothing. He knew she was right. He knew this was no longer just sabotage. This was a message sent to the woman standing before him, the woman the world saw as a fearless CEO, but who at this moment was struggling not to collapse. Emily stepped back until she hit the table, her palms pressing against it, as if the ground beneath her had tilted. "Daniel." She breathed, her voice fractured. "You do not understand. This did not start last night. It started 6 months ago. When I refused to sign the deal the board tried to force on me." Daniel frowned. "What deal?" Emily bit her lip, a rare crack in her armor, revealing her war between telling him the truth or keeping him far from the danger line. In the end, she chose truth. "A company acquisition involving medical research. Something was wrong." Daniel leaned in slightly. "Wrong how the figures were fake. Data was manipulated. Money was routed into accounts that do not exist. If I signed, I would be enabling money laundering." Daniel cursed under his breath, not because he was shocked, but because he knew this was no longer corporate conflict. This was criminal, potentially high-level criminal. Emily continued. "When I refused, the accidents began. My tires were slashed. My home security system was hacked. My emails were breached. But last night was the first time they acted directly." Daniel inhaled slowly, his expression darkening with concern. "Why didn't you run?" Emily let out a short, sharp, painful laugh. "Because if I run, they win. And worse, I would leave thousands of people in my company to suffer the consequences." Daniel suddenly saw her clearly. Emily was not just strong. She was resolute to the point of making her own life a shield for everyone she was responsible for. But one question rose above all others. "If they want you dead," Daniel asked, "then why did you come here?" Emily went silent. A long silence, the kind that made Daniel take a step back, because he sensed the answer might reshape everything. Finally, Emily spoke, each word pulled from somewhere deep and raw inside her. "Because last night, I realized something. You are the only person who helped me without asking for anything. No benefit, no agenda. And in my world, that is almost extinct." Daniel clenched his jaw. He was not used to being trusted so suddenly. It left him feeling exposed. But Emily kept speaking, her voice dipping lower, her loneliness bleeding through. "I do not know who in my company is against me. I do not know who tried to kill me. But I know you are the only one untouched by their greed. You are safe. You are clean." Daniel let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You think I am clean? I am just a plumber." Emily shook her head, her tired smile sincere. "That is exactly why." Daniel opened his mouth to respond when a sudden knock at the door cut him off. The knock was soft, but in that moment it froze the entire house. Daniel turned to Emily. Emily turned to Daniel. Both understood instantly. No one knew she was here. No one knew about last night. No one except the people Emily was running from. The knock came again, harder this time. Lila ran out from her room, but Daniel quickly blocked her with one arm and pulled her behind him. Emily whispered, her voice lower than a breath. "Do not open the door." Daniel stood still. A third knock echoed through the house, and this time a cold, metallic voice followed. "Mr. Brooks, we need to talk. It is about Miss Hart." Emily's face went pale. Daniel felt his blood turn to ice. The storm from last night was not over. It had only just begun. The fourth knock hit the door with a force so heavy and deliberate that the entire small house seemed to vibrate with it. Daniel stood frozen, one hand gripping Lila's shoulder as he pulled her behind him, his eyes locked on the trembling door, as if whoever stood outside was testing the strength of its hinges. Emily's breathing quickened, but not with ordinary fear. It was the breath of someone remembering the feeling she fought so long to forget, the sensation of being cornered. Her gaze flicked sharply from the back door to Daniel, then to the still steaming cup of coffee on the table, a detail that made her stiffen even more. "They know we're still here," she whispered, her voice sharp as ice. Daniel nodded once, slow and steady, as if his body had already shifted into protection mode. "Mr. Brooks," the man outside called again, impatience beginning to crack through his tone. "We know Miss Hart is inside your home. Please open the door. We only want to talk. We don't want trouble." Daniel almost laughed, a tight, humorless sound that he bit back before it escaped. "Don't want trouble" had never once been a reliable promise when spoken by men knocking on your door before sunrise. Emily tugged lightly at Daniel's sleeve, her eyes sharp with warning. "Do not open it, no matter what happens." Daniel glanced at her for a single second, only one, but it was enough for him to see something he had never seen on her face, so clearly, until now, absolute fear hidden under all that strength. And not fear for herself, fear for him, and for Lila. The fifth knock hit harder, rattling the frame, as if their fists carried a message of their own. "We need to assess Miss Hart's condition," the man outside said, his breath audible through the crack beneath the door. "The accident last night may have caused trauma. We're from the company's medical division." Emily's eyes widened, her hands clenching until her knuckles turned white. "My company's medical division never visits anyone's home." "They're lying." Daniel pressed a finger to his lips, urging silence, then moved to the small side window, pulling the curtain just enough to peek outside. What he saw made his blood freeze. Two men in black suits stood at the doorstep, neither one resembling medical personnel. They looked more like private security for someone with far too much power. Their vehicle, a black SUV with no front plate, was parked tight against the curb. Daniel stepped back immediately. "We're not opening," he whispered. Emily moved closer, so close he could feel the warmth of her breath against his neck. "If they try to break in," Daniel cut her off. "They won't. Not while my daughter is here." Behind him, Lila clung to his shirt, sensing fear she didn't understand, but felt deep in her bones. Emily looked at the little girl, and something in her gaze shifted, softening, sharpening, deepening all at once. The sixth knock never came. Instead, footsteps moved away from the door. Emily tensed like a bowstring, suspicion flashing through her eyes. Did they leave? Daniel shook his head. No, just repositioning. And right on cue, Gravel crunched under boots near the living room window. A shadow passed across the sliver of light, someone trying to look inside. Daniel yanked the curtain shut, his heartbeat pounding like war drums. "Emily," he whispered, voice tight. "Do you have your phone?" Emily touched the shirt pocket. Nothing. Daniel frowned. "Where is it? Lost in the crash?" "Or taken?" she answered quickly. Daniel felt the situation slipping from dangerous into lethal. He scanned the kitchen for anything he could use to defend them. A cast-iron pan, a small metal pipe for clearing drains, an old knife. None of it would hold up against armed men in suits. Emily grabbed his hand suddenly. "Daniel," she said, her voice firm. "I need you to stay calm. If you lose control, they'll have an excuse to attack." Daniel let out a bitter breath that almost counted as a laugh. "I am calm, but they are not touching my daughter." Emily met his eyes. "I know." Another shadow appeared at the back door, the footsteps heavy and intentional, as if someone were measuring the house. Daniel pushed Emily down behind the counter. "Get low," he whispered. "Do not let them see you." Emily obeyed, but she carried the poised tension of someone who had lived too long in a battlefield of boardrooms and betrayal. No panic, no screaming, just readiness. A voice came from the back door, deeper and more dangerous. "Miss Hart, if you do not open this door, we must assume you are in danger. And if that is the case, we will enter by any means necessary." Daniel knew it was not a warning. It was a threat. Rage boiled beneath his skin, not fear, but instinct. He rose halfway, intent on confronting the threat when Emily's grip tightened on his arm. "No. If you engage, they'll act immediately." Daniel stared at her, his voice turning to iron. "Then what do you want me to do?" "Watch them break in." Emily drew a sharp breath, her mind moving fast. "Is there any way out the front that they cannot see?" Daniel shook his head. "No. Only 2 exits." They stared at each other in a silence so tight it felt like the walls were squeezing inward. Finally Emily said, voice low and urgent, "Daniel, they won't force entry yet. They need a signal, which means they're waiting for someone else," Daniel finished. Emily nodded. That realization shrank the tiny home even further. And as if to confirm their fear, another sound rose from the street, crisp, coordinated chilling. 2 more vehicles stopping. Daniel peeked again, and what he saw dried his throat instantly. Not just the original 2 men. 4. Then 5. Spreading out like wolves, waiting for their prey to make a mistake. Emily gripped Daniel's wrist. They didn't come to talk. "I know," Daniel breathed. And in that razor-thin moment, Lila's trembling voice whispered from behind him, "Daddy, who are those people?" Daniel turned, pulling her into his arms, a sharp ache slicing through him. His daughter should never have to see this. Emily watched them, father and child, holding on to each other, in the middle of a small house that felt one breath away from breaking open, and something inside her, something deep and long hidden, cracked. She stood resolute as someone preparing to walk into fire. "Daniel, I'm going out there." Daniel spun around his face, draining of color. "No, absolutely not. I have to," Emily said, her voice cold, but her eyes shimmering faintly. "If I do not, they will break the door. Lila will be caught in the middle. I will not let that happen." Daniel grabbed her hand. "Are you insane? If you step outside, they will take you. Or worse." Emily looked at him, with a resolve so fierce he felt it pull him in. "I am more afraid of your daughter being in danger than I am of what they will do to me." Daniel froze. He had met many wealthy people pretending to be noble, but none had said something like this. Not like they meant it. Outside, a radio crackled. A new voice ordered, "Stand by to enter." Emily whispered, almost like the final words before a battle. "Daniel, trust me one more time. Just once more." And before he could pull her back, Emily walked straight toward the front door. No hesitation. No fear. No turning back. The door opened. A burst of white light flooded in, and everything after that shattered. When the door swung open, Daniel nearly stopped breathing, and Emily stepped outside, as if her entire life had been leading to this one moment. The morning light washed over her face, highlighting the droplets still clinging to her hair from last night's storm. But her eyes no longer trembled. They were sharp as blades and still as ice, dangerous and unshakably proud in a way the men on the lawn had never expected. 5 men in black suits turned toward her all at once, like a pack of wolves sensing prey leaving its shelter. Daniel gripped the door handle tightly, his heart beat pounding so loudly he could hear it in his ears, ready to charge forward, if anyone so much as lifted a hand against her. But Emily raised her hand, a light movement that carried the weight of command. "Stop," she said, her voice low and edged with steel, and for a fraction of a second, the 5 suits froze just long enough to reveal that they had not anticipated she would walk out, willingly, much less speak first. The man in front, tall, broad, shouldered with a jawline, sharp as forged metal, took a single step forward. "Miss Hart," he said, with a smooth, practiced voice, "so you finally decided to appear." Emily did not answer immediately. She studied each face, each hand, each shift of weight, analyzing them the way someone solved a life or death equation. Daniel knew she was identifying who gave the orders, who was just muscle, and who would strike first if things went wrong. The man spoke again. "We're here to escort you back to the company. The board is concerned about your health after last night's accident." Emily looked at him with a smile so cold it no longer resembled a smile at all. "I was targeted for murder, not fighting a cold." He froze for half a second, then let out a brittle laugh that bounced across the yard. "You misunderstand. No one wants you dead." Really, Emily took half a step closer, her eyes drilling through the professional mask on his face. "Then who tampered with my brake system?" Silence. Another man behind him exchanged a quick glance with a colleague, a subtle signal, but clear enough for Emily to see they were not here to escort her for any medical evaluation. Daniel, still standing inside the doorway with his hand gripping the frame, felt like he was witnessing 2 different worlds colliding on his front porch. A lone woman standing against an entire system, trying to crush her. The leader's tone shifted deeper and more menacing. "Miss Hart, if you refuse to cooperate, we will have to assume you are mentally unstable after the collision. In that case, we are authorized to take you in for safety, under medical protocol." Emily laughed, a sharp sound, like glass breaking. "My mental state only deteriorates when I have to look at murderers pretending to be colleagues at the door of an innocent man's home." Every hair on Daniel's arm stood straight. Emily was no longer dodging attacks. She was provoking them, challenging them openly. And that was what made the leader narrow his eyes and step forward again. "You are making this worse, Emily." "No," she replied, her voice low and powerful enough to make Daniel shiver. "I am stopping it." He lifted his hand slightly, signaling the 2 men behind him to advance. Daniel's eyes widened, ready to leap forward, but Emily stopped him again with nothing but a look. A look that said, "Don't. I can take this." The 2 suits approached, but just before they could reach her, Emily dropped a sentence that hit like a gunshot. "I sent a copy of the accounting data to an external source. If I disappear, it goes straight to the press." Silence fell instantly heavy and absolute, like a stone tossed into still water. The two men halted, the leader's jaw clenched. Daniel felt the air shift, the pressure bending around them. Emily had just reversed the balance of power, even if only for a moment. "You would not dare," the man growled, his voice darkening. Emily raised an eyebrow. "Want to find out?" A flicker of uncertainty flashed across his eyes, small but unmistakable. Emily saw it. Daniel saw it. And even Lila, trembling in Daniel's arms, sensed the danger, retreating a tiny, fragile step. But the man didn't back down. He was not the kind to be pushed into retreat so easily. "Whatever you think you sent," he said, "trying to regain control, you still have to come back to the company today." "Emergency board meeting," Emily answered instantly, without hesitation. "I will be there, but not with you." Another slice of silence, sharper than the first. Everyone understood what she had just declared. She would face the board as a fighter, not a victim, and she would not let them stage the narrative. But then the man let out a thin, chilling smile. "You think you have a choice?" The moment the words left his mouth, one of the men behind him stepped forward, reaching to grab her arm. Daniel snapped it. He lunged forward with the kind of instinct that could only come from a father or a man pushed to his limit. "Don't touch her," he shouted. The man turned toward him with a look of contempt. "Ah, the rescuer. This doesn't involve you." Daniel planted himself in front of Emily, legs rooted like iron. "Since last night it does." Emily saw his back shielding her, saw him standing as if he were ready to take on the whole world for her, and in her chest something hot and unfamiliar surged, something she had not felt in years, someone standing with her. The leader signaled his men to move again. One reached forward, about to shove Daniel aside, but then Emily spoke a single sentence that froze every moving muscle. "He's not the only witness." All 5 men turned instantly. Emily stared directly at the leader, her voice cutting clean through the tension. "I know who controls the slush fund. I know who moved the money overseas. And I have proof. A lot of it." No one moved. No one spoke. Daniel felt the atmosphere shift violently, as if the storm itself had changed direction. Emily continued, her voice like ice sharpening. "If you take me here right now, it will be the most public confession of guilt you could possibly make." The leader stared at her for a long moment, then looked at Daniel, then at the old house, then at the black SUV parked on the street. He was calculating, weighing risk, and the risk was too high. Finally he said, "Fine. You have until noon. You will appear at the board meeting." If not, he left the threat unfinished. He didn't need to say it. The men turned and retreated, quick and deliberate, just as they had arrived. The engines of 3 vehicles roared to life, then disappeared down the narrow road. When the last sound faded, Emily's knees buckled, as if the strength she had used to face them had drained out of her body. Daniel caught her instantly. "Are you all right?" Emily met his eyes, her gaze blurred by the weight of the truth she had just confirmed. "Daniel, I don't think we have much time left." In that moment, both of them understood from the second Emily stepped through that door. They were no longer ordinary people, living ordinary lives. They had walked straight into the heart of the storm, and that storm would consume everything unless they faced it together. The small house, after they left, fell into a suffocating silence, the kind of silence that did not come from peace, but from the world pulling back in order to strike harder the next time. Daniel kept his hand under Emily's elbow, holding her steady as her legs seemed to lose all strength. Her face, though, she fought to appear composed, had turned pale in a way that looked like she had just stared into an abyss. He wanted to say something to comfort her. Anything, but every word felt meaningless when danger could return at any moment. Lila stood pressed against the doorway, her wide eyes filled with confusion, unable to understand why strangers had come to their home or why Emily, the woman she had only met hours earlier, was trembling so slightly. Daniel crouched down and pulled his daughter into his arms. "It's all right, sweetheart," he whispered, though even he did not know whether the reassurance was meant for her or for himself. Emily braced a hand on the table to steady her breathing, her gaze still fixed on the road where the black SUVs had disappeared. "Daniel, they will come back," she murmured, her voice no longer sharp, but so exhausted that Daniel stared at her, just to make sure she was still conscious. "Not today," he answered. "They want you at the board meeting. They will not act until they know how you plan to strike back." Emily let out a hollow, weary laugh, the kind born from years of fighting shadows. "You do not understand. We only survived this morning because I am still useful to them. But after the meeting today, if I show them I am no longer useful," Daniel tightened his grip on her shoulder, an instinctive gesture that came without thought. "You are not going alone." Emily lifted her gaze, her grey eyes wavering with conflict. "Daniel, I have dragged you in too far already." "No," he replied, his voice steady as stone. "When I pulled you out of the car last night, that was when I was dragged in. Everything after that is just the consequence." For the briefest moment, Emily's eyes softened, a tiny fracture appearing in the armor she had wrapped around herself, but she quickly regained her composure and turned toward the kitchen table. "I need a laptop. I have to prove everything before they twist the story." Daniel nodded and rushed into the bedroom to retrieve his old laptop. While he was gone, Emily moved to the dining table and pulled from Daniel's shirt pocket a small black memory card, the kind with high capacity and encrypted capability usually reserved for secure projects. Daniel returned just as she inserted it into the laptop. The screen lit up, prompting a password. Emily typed rapidly, her fingers moving with the precision of muscle memory. A folder opened, filled with documents, internal investigation reports, contract duplicates, transaction logs, and coded transfers Daniel had never seen in his life. "This is what they want. Buried," Emily said, her eyes locked onto the screen. "The slush fund, the laundering pipeline. If the board sees that I have this, they will silence you by any means necessary," Daniel finished. Emily looked at him, unable to deny it. Files flashed open, one after another, data streaming like a waterfall, and even though Daniel did not understand all of it, he knew one thing clearly: the missing money was not harmless numbers. It was something powerful people were willing to kill her to protect. As they scrolled through the files, Emily suddenly froze. She enlarged a section of the transaction log, a transfer, made the same night as the crash. The recipient, a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. The sender, David. Emily's body stiffened. Daniel looked at her. "Who is David?" Her face drained of color. "My deputy chief executive officer." "The one you trusted most," Daniel's voice dropped. Emily did not answer. She did not need to. Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. Betrayal always cut deepest when it came from someone who knew where your armor cracked. Emily inhaled sharply, her fingers racing across the keyboard. "I have to prepare a full report to present to the board. They need to see the truth, not the version David will fabricate." Daniel glanced at her, then at Lila, curled on the sofa, with her knees to her chest, her eyes still glistening. He knew he could not let Emily face this alone. He also knew he could not bring Lila into the line of fire. He placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "I am taking you to the company." Emily looked up. "You do not have to." "I have to," Daniel said firmly. "If I had not been here this morning, they would have dragged you into one of those cars. I am not letting that happen again." Emily nodded slightly this time without arguing, but Daniel was not done. He turned to Lila. "Sweetheart," he called gently. She looked at him, those dark brown eyes, full of unconditional trust, the kind that broke him a little more every time. "You're going to stay with Aunt Linda this morning, okay?" Lila nodded right away. She was used to the days when Daniel had to go work, used to being independent. But today she sensed something heavier. "Daddy will be okay?" she asked, voice trembling. Daniel gathered her into a tight embrace, feeling her tiny breaths shaking with fear. "Daddy is always okay," he whispered, "because Daddy has to come home to you." She nodded hard and clung to him for a long moment before he gently set her down. Emily watched the scene, and for a fleeting second, her face changed, revealing an emotion Daniel had never seen in her, something like aching envy, the kind of longing that comes from looking at a family she never had. After Lila left with the neighbor, Daniel turned back to Emily, his voice more resolute than ever. "Now we go." Emily told him to wait a moment, then stepped into the bedroom. His bedroom, and when she emerged, she wore a simple grey blazer Daniel kept for formal jobs, paired with straight black pants and low shoes he had never seen her wear before. She looked strong, vulnerable, and like someone who had shed every lingering fear in preparation for war. Daniel looked at her and felt something he could not name. She looked like a flame, not the kind that destroyed, but the kind that lit the path into a darkness no one else dared walk into. Emily closed the laptop and held it like a final weapon. "Daniel," she said, "before we go, I want you to hear this." He met her eyes. "No matter what happens at that board meeting today, know that last night you didn't just save me from an accident. You saved me from the world that almost made me lose myself." Daniel answered with a steady, unwavering gaze. "You are not alone, Emily." She drew a deep breath and nodded. They stepped out of the house. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained full of heavy clouds, as if the storm were waiting to drop again, not on rooftops or roads, but on a building where power, deceit, and millions of dollars were gathered like a battlefield. Noon was approaching, and they, two people from entirely different worlds, drove straight into the heart of the storm. The Tower of Hart Industries rose above the city like a carved block of steel and glass, sharp-edged, cold and towering, a constant reminder that power never stands still. It moves, it breathes, and it devours the weak. Daniel pulled into the executive entrance as Emily directed, and the sight that greeted him made his palms damp with sweat. Security stood thicker than usual, each guard exchanging tense glances as if already warned about someone they intended to control. Emily stepped out of the car first. Even wearing Daniel's old blazer, she carried the aura of someone who commanded an empire. Her back straight, her chin lifted, her eyes cold and unreadable. Daniel walked behind her, silent but every muscle in his body drawn tight, as if ready to explode at the slightest threat. A guard approached his voice, polite but heavy. "We will escort you to the boardroom, Miss Hart." Emily glanced at him, a look so sharp he stepped back, without meaning to, as though she answered not with words, but with the presence of a leader who had faced enemies far more dangerous than him. "I do not need an escort," she replied firmly. "I know the way." The guard looked at Daniel, suspicion tightening his expression. And this man Emily did not blink. The only person I trust. The sentence struck the air like a pin hitting a balloon, stopping Daniel mid-step. Not because he felt pride, but because the weight of those words was immense in a moment like this. They entered the elevator. The doors closed. For the first time since leaving the house, Emily allowed herself a deeper breath. Daniel tilted his head toward her. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Emily pressed her lips together, eyes fixed on the ascending floor numbers. "I am not sure I want to, but I am sure I need to." A light silence rested between them, not awkward, but like a shared heartbeat before stepping onto a battlefield. When the doors opened on the 43rd floor home to the boardroom, Emily immediately returned to her controlled composure, though Daniel could feel the electric tension humming beneath her skin. The hallway stretched long, with thick carpet and frosted glass reflecting cold white light. Every step echoed softly, like the sound of truth demanding to be spoken. As they approached the boardroom, the noises inside made Daniel tense. It did not sound like a meeting. It sounded like predators gathering. Emily opened the door and silence fell like a blade. 12 board members turned to face her, their eyes a mix of curiosity, calculation, coldness, and in some cases unmistakable hostility. At the head of the table sat David Gray, the Deputy Chief Executive Officer she had once trusted most. He leaned back in his chair, wearing an unnervingly calm expression, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Daniel recognized instantly this was the man who betrayed her. David rose with a false, friendly smile. "Emily, we are so glad you came. We've been worried about you all morning." Emily pulled out a chair, sat and placed the laptop in front of her, without giving David a single glance. "I trust you've heard about my accident," she said, her voice even, but each word cutting through the air like claws against stone. "Yes," David replied, stepping forward with a tone meant for soothing a child, "and it seems you are under tremendous stress. We are here to help." The room murmured, some nodding with him, others staying silent. Daniel could not tell who was on which side, but he could feel the room split in two, half wanting Emily to fall, half waiting to see which direction power would tilt. Emily opened her laptop. "Help," she repeated, her voice edged with bitter irony. "Yes. You have certainly helped, especially by hiding the disappearance of $10 million from the research fund." The room erupted in whispers. David took only 3 seconds to cover his shock. "Emily, that is an extremely serious accusation with no evidence." Emily turned the laptop toward the board and opened the file Daniel had seen earlier. "Here is the evidence." The screen displayed account codes, transfer logs, offshore accounts, all so clear and exact that no one could pretend not to understand. The tension tightened around the room like a rope. Daniel watched Emily swallow. Subtly she was nervous, but still completely in control. David attempted a strained smile, but the muscles in his face betrayed him. "These documents are fabricated. Someone created them to frame me or anyone else here." Emily stood, placing her hands on the table, her gaze drilling into the board and then directly into David. "They are not fabricated. They were taken from the internal server, a server only you can access. David, you did not just steal money. You tried to kill me to silence me." Several faces in the room went pale. Others looked away. David smiled, a smile that made Daniel's fists clench. "Emily," he said softly, "you're emotional. That crash last night left you paranoid." Emily let out a laugh, cold and sharp, like glass breaking. Paranoid. The brake system was tampered with. The door was pried open. A hidden camera was attached under my car. The police retrieved fragments of it in the trunk when they towed the vehicle. "Would you like me to show the board?" David froze. The board exchanged alarmed glances. A senior member asked, "David, is this true?" David opened his mouth, but Emily was faster. She pressed a key, opening an audio recording from the restaurant camera last night, where she had confronted David before leaving. His voice filled the room. "If you sign, we both get rich. If you don't, I cannot guarantee what happens on your drive home." Daniel looked at Emily. Emily looked at David. David looked at the room. And the room exploded into chaos. People talking over one another, denying, accusing, scrambling. But amid all of it, David stood still, his eyes narrowing before he abruptly shifted tactics. He pointed at Daniel. "And who is he?" Emily did not blink. "The man who saved my life." David looked Daniel up and down, sneering. "A plumber. That is your only witness. How much did she pay you to play the hero?" Daniel clenched his fists, but Emily lifted her hand slightly, a silent signal to stand down. She stared straight at David. "Daniel does not need to be paid to do what is right. Not like some people in this room." Silence fell, not because they supported her, but because the truth had grown too large to ignore. The chairman slammed his hand on the table. "We are launching an immediate investigation, and until the truth is verified, David Gray is suspended." David shot to his feet. "You will regret this," he shouted. But Emily replied with a calmness that chilled even Daniel. "I have regretted enough. Now it is your turn." 2 security officers entered to escort him out. He snarled, glaring at Emily and Daniel with raw hatred. When the boardroom door finally closed, the entire room fell into absolute silence. Daniel looked at Emily. Emily looked at Daniel. And for the first time that morning, she exhaled a long, trembling breath, the breath of someone who had walked through a battlefield and remained standing. But Daniel saw something else in her eyes. This was only the beginning. Because in the world of power, truth was never enough to make every villain vanish. It merely lit the fire for the next war. And that fire was burning in the eyes of Emily Hart. When the boardroom doors closed and David was escorted out, the atmosphere collapsed into a tension heavier than the storm from the night. Before a silence, born not from calm, but from people who had just witnessed truth being stripped bare, and still were not ready to face the consequences. Emily stood there with both hands braced against the table, her shoulders trembling from exhaustion, but her eyes still burned with a fierce light Daniel had never seen in anyone, a mixture of victory and hurt, and the hollow realization that the war ahead was longer and darker than she had imagined. Daniel stood half a step behind her, like an invisible shield, saying nothing, but his presence alone allowed her to breathe after hours of standing unarmed before wolves. In that moment, the chairman approached, placing a hand on the table, his face conflicted admiration for Emily, worry for the company, and fear of the earthquake David had ignited. "Emily," he said quietly, "what you just revealed, it will trigger the biggest purge in this company's history." Emily lifted her gaze, steady and unflinching. "If that is the price for keeping this company out of greedy hands, I accept it." A few board members nodded respectfully. Others exchanged cautious glances, calculating where their loyalty should shift. Daniel realized that although Emily had won a major battle, she was still standing alone on a battlefield where enemies hid on every side. When the meeting adjourned, Emily closed her laptop, her hands shaking slightly, though she fought to hide it. Daniel stepped beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low like a whisper in a war zone. "I do not know," Emily replied, staring at her own hands. "I won, so why do I not feel lighter?" Daniel looked at her, seeing the loneliness leaking through the cracks in her strength, and he said something even he had not expected to say. "Because the war is not over. But you are not fighting alone anymore." Emily lifted her gaze to him. For the first time all morning her eyes softened for real, as if the weight of an empire she had been carrying finally allowed itself a breath. "Daniel," she began, but the conference room phone rang, slicing through the moment. A board member answered his expression, draining of color before he turned to Emily. "Miss Hart, security downstairs reports that David has left the building." But he hesitated. But what Emily asked, he did not leave alone. A car picked him up, no license plates, and he was smiling. A chill shot down Daniel's spine. Emily inhaled sharply. "He will retaliate," she whispered. "Not now," Daniel said. "He is too smart to act while eyes are still on him." "That is what terrifies me," Emily replied. "When dangerous men know how to wait." They left the boardroom under the watch of dozens of employees. Some looked at Emily with admiration, others with caution, the wary look of people who sensed power shifting and did not yet know which side to stand on. Daniel walked alongside her, maintaining just enough distance not to draw attention, yet close enough to step in if a threat appeared. In the elevator, Emily leaned against the glass wall, eyes closing for a brief moment. Daniel watched her. "Do you regret it?" he asked. Emily opened her eyes and met his gaze. "If I stayed silent, I would live longer. But I would no longer be myself, and the deaths of others would sit on my conscience. I choose what is right, even if it costs me." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand," he said, "because good people always pay the highest price." Emily gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "Daniel, you saved me last night, but this morning you saved me again." Before he could respond, the elevator doors opened to the sleek lobby full of light and glass and steel, a world Daniel had never belonged to. But when Emily stepped forward, he walked beside her without hesitation. As they reached the exit, the afternoon sun fell over them, as if the world outside momentarily held no threat, but only for a moment, because as Daniel opened the car door for her, he saw something that made his chest tighten. A black SUV sat in the far corner of the lot, its windows tinted so dark it was impossible to see inside, sitting motionless like a shadow waiting for movement. Daniel slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. "We need to leave," he said. Emily followed his gaze and understood immediately. It was not David in that car, but whoever worked with him could be. "Daniel," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. "I think my peaceful days ended a long time ago." Daniel started the engine, eyes fixed on the SUV. "Then let me help you get them back." And as they drove away, the SUV did not move, but Daniel knew without a doubt that this was only the quiet before the storm returned. And next time, it would come for both of them. The entire road out of the city fell into silence, a tension taut as a bowstring and heavier than the grey winter sky hanging over the skyline. Emily gazed out the window, hiding her still trembling hands beneath Daniel's blazer, while Daniel drove with absolute vigilance, eyes constantly scanning the rear-view mirrors to make sure no black SUV was following them. When they arrived at Daniel's neighborhood, the sky had darkened, the last rays of sunlight, blocked by heavy clouds, as if the world itself held its breath, waiting to see how events would unfold. Daniel exited the car first, his eyes sweeping the familiar streets before opening the door for Emily. She stepped down slowly, each footfall carrying the weight of a long day of fighting. "Daniel," she whispered, "you shouldn't be involved in this anymore. Today you've already done too much." Daniel did not answer immediately. He looked into her eyes, seeing not just fatigue, but the fear she tried to hide behind each breath. "Emily," he said slowly and firmly, "I do not care whether I should be involved. I care about whether you are safe." Emily opened her mouth to argue, but for the first time all morning and afternoon, her voice caught. "Daniel, I do not want you hurt. The people I face, they are not ordinary people you've ever encountered." Daniel stepped a little closer. "Then let them meet someone who is not ordinary like me." Emily smiled, but her eyes glimmered. "Why do you make me want to believe things I know are dangerous, Daniel?" "Because you need someone to trust," Daniel said. "And because no one in your world would think of protecting you except me." Emily held his gaze longer than necessary, as if searching for something in the depth of his eyes, a place even she had not expected to look. They entered the house. No more threatening knocks at the door, no unfamiliar footsteps, no black SUV lingering outside, yet the home still carried the breath of a war not yet finished. Emily sat on the sofa, the one Daniel had slept on the night before, to give her the bed, and braced her hands against her forehead. "I thought bringing the truth to light would end everything," she whispered, "but I feel like I am sinking deeper." Daniel sat on the edge of the table across from her. Because darkness does not vanish immediately. It is thick, it is stubborn, but light only needs one person to hold it. Emily's eyelashes quivered slightly. "Do you think I can win?" Daniel paused for a moment. "I think you have never lost. You have only been betrayed." A long exhale escaped her, neither cry nor laugh, but the relief of someone who had carried too much for too long. "I do not know how much longer I can stand," she admitted. "You will stand," Daniel whispered, "because you are no longer standing alone." Emily lowered her gaze to her hands, and for the first time, Daniel saw her completely release the cold armor she had built around herself. In that moment, she was not a CEO, not a woman hunted, not a warrior facing an entire system. She was simply a human, tired, wounded, yet still standing. And Daniel could not bear to see her like that. He moved to sit beside her. No words, no empty comfort. Just a hand placed over hers, warm, firm, and peaceful, in a way Emily had never realized she needed. She lifted her head, eyes red. "Daniel, if tomorrow I face the media, the shareholders, the police, I do not know what will happen." "Whatever happens," Daniel said softly, but clearly, "I will still stand by your side." Emily blinked, as if unable to believe that a simple statement could make her heart ache so much. Not ache from sorrow, but from protection, the feeling she had forgotten for years. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Daniel looked into her eyes, and his answer was not to convince her, but the truth he had always known. "Because I cannot bear to see you fight alone. Because you deserve someone at your side. And because I care for you more than I should allow myself." Emily's face softened, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, but unable to. Instead, she did something no one, including herself, could have predicted. She rested her head against Daniel's shoulder. No drama, no weakness. Just a woman too tired seeking a safe place to breathe. Daniel tensed for a moment, then relaxed. relaxed, tilting his head into her hair. The faint scent made him close his eyes for a second, as if to imprint this moment in case tomorrow it no longer existed. Emily whispered, voice caught in her breath. "Thank you for being here." Daniel answered in the last light of day, streaming through the window. "I will stay here longer than you think." Outside, darkness deepened. Inside, for the first time since the storm began, Emily fell asleep in the arms of someone not part of her ruthless world, but the only person brave enough to step in and hold her. And Daniel, in a rare moment, free of fear for the future, simply sat there, keeping her safe, so that the darkness outside could not touch Emily Hart tonight. The battle would wait for tomorrow, but tonight he was the only place she could truly lean on. From the perspective of an expert in human behavior and organizational culture, the story of Daniel Brooks and Emily Hart is not just a sequence of thrilling events. It is a vivid testament that kindness, integrity, and courage can sometimes be more powerful than wealth and authority. When faced with pressure from power challenges or even danger, the way we choose to stand up, protect others, and uphold our personal values is the true measure of character. Daniel is not a CEO. He is an ordinary man. Yet his acts of decency saved a life and created lasting change. Emily, despite her power and wealth, learned the true value of bravery, trust, and relationships built on respect. This is a reminder that character cannot be bought, but it can inspire and transform the world around us. If this story resonates with you, like to spread the message of kindness and courage, subscribe so you do not miss the next human-centered story, and comment the phrase "stand firm" as a reminder that sometimes just one act of decency can change the world.